was the global economic downturn. So the global economic downturn of 2008, when basically the G20 was created and when the G8 was broadened to a 20-membered community, 20-membered committee as such. And in the end, and last but not least, obviously, we all know that we are suffering a crisis right now. This is why our class is online. So this is why we are not seeing each other in person. And actually, the G20 is also invited to give a reaction to the current economic downturn and the health crisis, the pandemic of the world that we are suffering right now. What does it have to do with the BRICS? So what does it have to do with the BRICS countries? So what is the entire thing have to do with the BRICS? The answer is very easy. Please scroll down this page. So please scroll down on this page and please have a look at the first 5 bullet points written by Jim O'Neill. I would like to tell you that Mr. Jim O'Neill is a British economist. Actually, he originally comes from Manchester, from the United Kingdom. He has attained his PhD degree at the Surrey University. And then for a long run, he has moved to the United States of America, where he worked for Goldman Sachs. This is where he published this paper in 2001. And later on, he has returned to the United Kingdom, where he still lives. For a very short term, for a very short while, he worked for the British Prime Minister's Theresa May's, so Mrs. Theresa May's government for the UK Treasury. And in the end, Mr. Jim O'Neill had a fallout with Mrs. May, and he left the UK Treasury for good, basically. However, he has carved out his place in history because he's the economist of the 20th century who has coined the acronym called BRICS with small s, later on with capital S. So we are going to see what's going on. And this is why he became very famous. And normally, why I'm having classes, I'm giving the opportunity to students to write activity papers, you all know. Actually, before starting our entire class, so before going on with the BRICS theorem, I would like to tell you that you can write anything on Mr. Jim O'Neill because I think he's one of the greatest economists of the 21st century, to be very honest, late 20th and early 21st century. So actually, any transcript of an interview with Mr. Jim O'Neill or a summary of his books available online or in the library is very cordially welcome because his insights are truly thorough. So he has brilliant insights into the economic movements of the 21st century. Actually, what he's writing in this paper, so this is how the BRICS theorem or the BRICS acronym came. In November 2001, at his workplace at Goldman Sachs, where they publish regular papers titled Global Economics Papers. So in paper 66, he has published an article with the title, Building Better Global Economic BRICS. And actually, obviously, this is a play with the words. This is a pun. Brick is brick, obviously. With the spelling, we've got a kind of problem. But anyhow, everyone understands that he means bricks, so real bricks that build a global economic community. In this 16-page document, he is underlining the economic development of Brazil, Russia, India, and China. So Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And I would like to stop here for a moment before I start explaining the BRICS. because this is the original document. So I am asking you to kindly read this. In the first two sentences on the first page, he is explaining how these countries are going to develop in economic terms. And this is why I told you that I would like, this is why I told you that I would like to stop. Because this document was conceived exactly 20 years ago. So it is 2021. And actually he has conceived this document exactly 20 years ago. Since then, there have been millions of follow-up papers on this. So this document was written 20 years ago, and since then, millions of follow-up papers, follow-up documents have been published. But many of the follow-up documents are basically evaluations on if Mr. Jim O'Neill has anticipated, has estimated correctly or incorrectly the economic development of Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And to be very honest, and this is not only my personal opinion, but it is a general conception that this is not a competition. So the point of the BRICS thesis is not a competition on when and how Brazil, Russia, India, and China are going to outcompete the G6 or the G8 economies. It is about two other things. The first and foremost thing is that in the 21st century, the key word is the size. Size matters. Size matters because these countries are big in territory. These countries are big in population. This is why their economy is consumption driven. So not anymore export driven, such as the newly industrialized economies, because they were all industry and export driven. Not anymore. These countries are consumption driven. And on the last place, it is not only big territories, not only big populations with huge consumptions, but huge aggregate GDPs. So actually the fact is, because these countries are huge, territory, population, and aggregate GDP, though on a per capita basis, so as for standards of living, these countries might not reach the living standards of the developed or advanced economies. However, the governments of these countries have a scope, have a gamut, have a place, have a space of decision and priorities, which means the governments, the administrations of these countries can decide liberally, freely on what their priorities are, and they can plan their economic and social development according to their priorities, because I'm going to be very blunt, the cake is huge. So actually they are sharing the cake however they wish to, because they have a massive cake to split up and to share among their people. Whereas small countries, so small countries have their hands shackled. I mean, the administrations of small countries have their hands shackled, and they have the option to join a regional integration to decide on their economic affairs, whereas the big countries and all the four BRICS countries have a liberty to decide and to prioritize. So this is what I would like to tell you, that on one hand, this is not a competition on when and how these countries are going to reach the standards of the G6, G7, G8, but this is a priority issue where these big countries enjoy much greater liberties than the smaller countries in the world that have basically a very, very strict path dependency, and they can proceed on their paths. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Yeah. Can you understand me? Is it okay? Can you understand me? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's okay
Very
for
good.
me.
Okay. Very good. So I'm going to go on. So this is one thing, that there is a room, there is a scope for priority. Number two, actually, before coining this theorem, basically the G countries were only comprising, obviously, the G6, so Germany, France, Italy, UK, US, Japan, and Canada and Russia. And at the historic moment of the millennium, so in 2001, Mr. Jim O'Neill suggested that, look, to create a fair economy, so to create a fair global economy, it would be very much advisable, to include the BRIC countries into global decision-making bodies. And basically, he was the first man who suggested that the G7 should incorporate BRIC representatives, and he was the first man in the world who suggested that basically the G7 should be reorganized. There should be a much bigger organization, a much greater entity that represents the approximately 200 countries in the world. And when there is a crisis, when there is a crisis, then basically this economic grouping that involves the BRICS countries could come up with decisions for the entire global economic community. So, do you understand me? Can you understand me? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to read out the first 4 sentences, then make a conclusion, and then I'm going to read out the last sentence on the first page, and then we are going to skip the document, and I will leave the document for you for reading for the next class. Okay. So the first sentence is, in 2001 and in 2002, real GDP growth in large emerging market economies will exceed that of the G7. So this is an economic anticipation. He is going to say that basically in 2001 and 2002, after the millennium, the real GDP growth in large emerging countries will be bigger than in the countries of the G7, full stop. So that is competition. So this is an anticipation, this is a competition. The second sentence. At the end of the year 2000, the GDP in US dollars on per PPP, purchasing power parity basis, in Brazil, Russia, India, and China, BRIC, was about 23% of the world GDP. On a current GDP basis, the BRICS share of the world GDP is, or was at that time, 8%. So what he says, that there are 4 countries in the world, and on a PPP basis, so purchasing power parity basis, their share of the global economy in 2000 was almost 24%. On a current GDP basis, it was approximately 8%. He's saying that actually these countries have their fair share of the global economy. He's also saying that using current GDP, China's GDP is bigger than that of Italy. Now we are smiling. So actually now all of us, so we are 24 in the meeting, and obviously 24 of 24 is smiling that China is bigger than Italy. 20 years ago, it was news. Today, it is not anymore news that China is bigger than the United States of America. But actually, he was the only one, or he was the first one, who said 20 years ago that look, my colleagues, there is something big happening in the world. And actually, 2 weeks ago, when I was drawing your attention to John Maynard Keynes and Harry Dexter White, I had the same intention, because when I am attracting your attention to Mr. Jim O'Neill, or when I am attracting your attention to Keynes or Harry Dexter White, I'm telling you, I'm suggesting you that there are larger than life personalities in the world. So actually there are economists who can cover a time span of 20, 50, or even 100 years. And most of us don't know what will happen tomorrow. And these people, these great economists, are huge seers of the future, the trajectory of the global economy. The fourth sentence is, over the next 10 years, so between 2001 and 2011, the weight of the BRICS, and especially China in the world GDP, will grow, raising important issues about the global economic impact of fiscal and monetary policy in the BRICS. So actually, he says that China's role in the world will grow, and basically China, and I'm going to come back at the end of the class, and China will have an impact of the fiscal and monetary policy of the BRICS countries. This is what I'm going to speak about. Actually, China and One Belt, One Road initiative. So the initiative of China has a bank, which is the Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank. One link is open about that now. It is sent in the chat box. And actually, the BRICS countries themselves have a bank as well, which is called the New Development Bank. And I also have shared it in the chat box. So actually, what he has anticipated, or what he anticipated in 2001, came true after less than 13 years. So less than 13 years. It took 10 years, and all his anticipations, all his projections came true. And one last sentence. In line with these prospects, world policymaking forums should be reorganized, and in particular, the G7 should be adjusted to incorporate BRIC representatives. So this is what I am saying, that actually the first 4 sentences are about how swiftly these economies are expanding. And the last sentence is about the fact that, look, there is a new world order. And if there is a new world order, we need to adjust. We need to understand who are the ones who have got money. And we need to reorganize international organizations to the standards of those, or to the practices of those who generate money in the global economy, and we should incorporate them into our decision-making processes. And I think it is huge, because he was the first one who has written down these thoughts. The next 15 pages are less relevant. Please read them. Actually, this is an argumentation on why and how these countries are going to expand. But once more, you can read millions of follow-up documents. The two messages, two takeaway messages I would like to give you on the BRICS thesis is, one, that basically these countries are going to be important because they are big in size, territory, GDP, and population, and they are going to be the drivers of the 21st century global economy. Two, actually, crises, and especially the G6, 7, 8, 20 countries, are massively reliant on these 4, later 5 countries that included South Africa. I'm going to go on with South Africa as well, obviously. So actually, these countries must be taken seriously, because they are going to be the centers of the global economy. So if you are a global economist, then please pay heed to these countries. Before we go on to the BRICS and before we understand the role of South Africa, I would like to open a BRICS chapter. So I would like to open a BRICS chapter. This is from a book which is titled Beyond the BRICS, A Look at the Next 11. It was published in April 2007. Have you got it? Have you got this BRICS chapter, please?
Yes.
Yes.
Everyone. Can I have a feedback, please?
No, I haven't. I couldn't find it. Can you please repeat?
Okay, yeah, I'm resending it. This is going to be the last one in the chat box. Okay, I'm resending it right now. Got it?
Yep. Yeah, I have it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Everyone has it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, very good. So you don't need to read the entire 6 pages. However, it is not really long. So actually, this is an excerpt of a book. It is not really long. The only thing I would like you to read is actually on the 3rd page of the document. So if you scroll down, there is Beyond the BRICS, Look at the Next 11, April 2007. Then there is a blank page. And actually, then there is a next page. And I only would like you to read the first 2 paragraphs. So actually, it is written, there is a question. So this chapter starts with a question. And actually it starts, which countries will be the next BRICS? We recently identified 11 countries that could rival the G7 over time, even if they lack the scale to become the next BRICS. Here we look at these next 11 or N11 in the context of several important BRICS themes: energy, infrastructure, urbanization, human capital, and technology. Actually, even Jim O'Neill was asked about the next 11 countries. And actually, as you can see in paragraph 2, in the same global economics papers, in number 153, he has included a new writing on the so-called N11 countries, next 11 countries. And actually, as you can see, the original document was number 66, and it is number 153. And this is where he defines 11 countries that are going to join the BRICS group. I will tell you why 11. So in a minute, I will tell you why 11. But I only would like you to go through the countries. So I'm reading out the names of the countries and then I analyze. So the next 11 countries will be Bangladesh, Egypt, Indonesia, Iran, Korea, Mexico, Nigeria, Pakistan, the Philippines, Turkey, and Vietnam. So first and foremost, why 11? There is no scientific answer, and I'm very honest. The original term was coined by Mr. Jim O'Neill, who, as I said, comes from Manchester. And he is a huge Manchester United fan, so he is a huge MU fan. And the thing is, as we all know, there are 11 people in a football team. And as a huge football fan, he intended to collect 11 countries. So this is the only scientific reason. Everything else is really scientific. Actually, he was looking for countries with big populations, so big populations, big territories, and big aggregate GDPs that are obviously not as big as Brazil, Russia, India, and China, but big enough to have the same scope for decision making and priority setting. And these countries, as you can see, once more, are Bangladesh, Egypt, Indonesia, Iran, Korea, Mexico, Nigeria, Pakistan, Philippines, Turkey, and Vietnam. We are going to go one by one, because we are going to go one by one, and I'll tell you why. Because based on this, and if you read the entire paper that analyzes these countries in terms of energy, infrastructure, urbanization, human capital, and terminology, we can safely conclude that basically the 21st century is the century of Asia. So this is an Asian century. 3 of the 4 BRICS countries are located in Asia. Russia is obviously in North Asia, parts of it in Europe, but the bigger part of Russia is in North Asia. India is obviously South Asia, and China is obviously East Asia. Let us have a look at the next 11 countries. Bangladesh is South Asia. Egypt is obviously Africa. However, if you analyze Egypt in a political sense, or a political or economic sense, then as a political and economic context, Egypt is often understood as West Asia as opposed to Africa. So though the country is on the African continent, in a political and economic concept, it is often understood as an integral part of the West Asian community. Indonesia is obviously Southeast Asia, and we are not going to forget that Indonesia is one of the 4 ASEAN countries, so ASEAN 4, and we all know that Indonesia is also a member of the Flying Geese paradigm, the multi-sequential industrial paradigm of Southeast Asia, where basically Indonesia is in the 3rd or 4th line of the flying countries in the Flying Geese paradigm. Iran is sometimes understood as West Asia, sometimes as South Asia, but anyhow, it is in Southwest Asia, so again, an Asian country. Korea is obviously East Asia, so Korea is obviously East Asia. Mexico is a delightful exception in Central or North America. And as we know, Mexico is also a member of the NAFTA, and we have heard about the Mexican financial crisis. Nigeria is obviously Africa, so Nigeria is obviously Africa. Pakistan, South Asia again. Philippines, Southeast Asia, and just like Indonesia, it is an ASEAN 4 country, equally a 3rd-tier country in the Flying Geese theorem. Turkey on the border of Europe and Asia, but most of its territories are obviously located in Asia. And again, Vietnam, an ASEAN country, which is not a member of the ASEAN 4, however, it is a member of the so-called CLMV countries, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, and Vietnam. Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam, but equally a country from Southeast Asia, the ASEAN community. So if we count Bangladesh, Indonesia, Iran, Korea, Pakistan, the Philippines, Turkey, and Vietnam, 8 of the 11 countries are located in Asia. However, if we consider politically and economically Egypt as Asia, then 9 of these countries, of the 11 countries, can be considered as Asian countries. This is why I'm telling you that if we are looking at country groupings, then the BRICS and the G20 countries are extremely relevant. And what is even more relevant is the fact that all the countries that are on the up and up are basically located in Asia. I'm going to be very honest with you. In the last 10 years, so in the last decade before the crisis, I mean the pandemic, this crisis, half of the growth of the global economy, so exactly half of the growth of the global economy came from the BRICS countries. This is why everyone in the world is concentrating on them, because they are massively, massively important. And what I would like you to do right now is to click on, I'll tell you which one immediately, the InfoBRICS. Have you got the InfoBRICS portal? Have you got, can I have a feedback, please?
Yes.
Yes.
Have you got the
Yes.
InfoBRICS link? Has everyone got it open?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, very good, very good. So if you go down the InfoBRICS portal, to the very bottom of the document, so the very bottom of the document, then you are going to see, that actually what I would like you to know, that the BRICS countries were basically initiated, so the BRICS countries were basically initiated by Mr. Vladimir Putin, so Minister Putin, on the fringes of the UN General Assembly session in New York in 2006. So actually, in 2006, Mr. Putin invited, then only, apart from Brazil, Russia, China, and India, to have a personal talk with him and forming a political alliance. And I would like to underline this because the BRICS countries are not a regional integration. The BRICS countries are not an international organization, so neither a regional organization, neither a regional integration, nor an organization, so nor an international organization. They are a political alliance initiated first and foremost by Russia, but also the 4 other countries, I would say India, China, and Brazil. The first formal meeting, was held in 2009 in June in Russia, in Yekaterinburg, and this was the first official summit. So it was the first official summit of the BRICS countries, okay? So it was the first official summit of the BRICS countries, okay? Have you got it? The first official summit of the BRIC countries. And I am not sure, so I am not quite sure if you've got this link, if all of you have got this link, but I'm going to copy it. Can you see the link I have just shared?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So the first meeting was in Yekaterinburg in Russia. If you open the Library of Congress Research Guide, you will see that in 2010, in December 2010, the 4 countries invited South Africa to join the 4 countries' political community. So once more, in December 2010, the 4 countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, invited South Africa to join this informal group, this political community. And from this date on, so from December 2010 on, actually the S at the end of the acronym, so the S at the end of the acronym is not small because it is not plural anymore. So it is not BRIC, 4 capitals and 1 small s, but this is 5 capital letters, BRICS, and the terminology is completely new because South Africa as a 5th country was added to the community. Actually, currently, these emerging markets, all of these countries are emerging markets that have basically excelled and they have shooted out from this economic grouping. These 5 countries represent 42% of the global population, and actually they produce over 1/3, 33% of the global GDP currently. Just like the G20, so just like the G20, these countries, these 5 countries are having a summit each and every year at a heads of state level. As I told you, the first summit was held in 2009 in Russia, in Yekaterinburg. In 2010, South Africa was invited, and there is a rotational fashion. I would like you to go to the end of the list. So I would like you to go at the end of the list. Last year, in November, the BRICS summit was held in Russia, Moscow. However, it was virtual because of the crisis. This year, so in 2021, the BRICS summit will go to India. So this year, the BRICS summit will go to India. However, it is going to be a joint organization by China and India. So China supports India. And it is very likely, it is not officially confirmed yet, but it is very likely that the Chinese Premier, Mr. Xi Jinping, will also personally go to India to co-organize this year's BRICS summit in India and co-organize it with his Indian counterparts. What I would like you to do right now is to look at 2 more publications that I have also shared in the chat box. Actually, one is the history of the New Development Bank, and one is the so-called Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, the AIIB. Let us go to the history of the New Development Bank. What is this? When we have opened up the policy papers, so when we have opened up the policy paper, the 66 from Mr. Jim O'Neill, the Building the Better BRICS, we have read the 4th sentence in the summary, where he has written that over the next 10 years, the weight of the BRICS and especially China in the world GDP will grow, raising important issues about the global economic impact of fiscal and monetary policy in the BRICS countries. This was the sentence I told you. Is that going to be very interesting in our translation? Actually, as we understand, the BRICS is nothing else but a political alliance. If we step back and if we question the role of international organizations or regional organizations, regional communities such as the European Union or the ASEAN or the Mercosur or the NAFTA or the GCC, we often ask ourselves how important these organizations are. How important are these regional or integrations? What does it depend on? And actually, if we go deep down, obviously these organizations have publicity. So if, for instance, the ILO publishes a paper, it is important. If the UN publishes a paper on anything, that is important. It reaches out to people. So actually, these international organizations have a source of publicity, and this is why they have an impact on the entire world. But, and there is always a but, and then an argument comes. Regional organizations, international organizations, political unions are taken seriously if, on one hand, they have a military force behind that. So, for instance, NATO or the UN blue hats, so or blue helmets or blue turbans, or and so on and so forth. So anyhow, all the forces that are backed up with military power are taken seriously. However, on the other hand, we can also say that if an international organization or a regional integration has no military power in the background, but provides money, a lending source, then it is again taken seriously. This is why the IMF, or this is why the OECD, or this is why the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank is taken seriously. And actually, the BRICS countries, so the BRICS countries are taken very seriously because apart from being a political union, in 2002, they have created a bank, and the bank was entitled New Development Bank. So in 2012 in New Delhi, a bank was created. And if you scroll down on this page on the history of the New Development Bank, then in the gray box, you can read that actually the bank was set with an initial authorized capital of 100 billion US dollars. Further expansions were anticipated. However, it is important to understand that in 2012, the bank had the same authorized capital as the International Monetary Fund, so the IMF, in 1994, when the Mexican financial crisis hit Central and North America. Since then, actually, the IMF's authorized capital was increased tenfold, and obviously there is an intent, there is a willingness to expand the authorized capital of the NDB, the New Development Bank. However, we've got an understanding right now that these 5 countries, actually have conceived an initial capital of $100 billion. It is very important to know that the headquarters of the bank will be located in Shanghai. So the center of the NDB will be in Shanghai. Why I am so cautious and why I am so reluctant in discussing the new development bank, which is a very important facility to endorse infrastructural and economic investments in these 5 countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. I'm going to be very honest with you. Please open the link that I have sent on the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank. The Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank is basically a Chinese bank. So it is a Chinese bank centered equally in China, not in Shanghai, but in Beijing. So this is a bank that is located equally in China, but not in Shanghai. However, it is located in Beijing. Why I am comparing these 2 banks, the NDB, the New Development Bank, and the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank? Because approximately at the same time, so please once more remember, the New Development Bank was established in 2012, and the AIIB was created almost at the same time. Actually 3 years later, but I tell you why 3 years later. So why in 2015? In 2013, so in 2013, China launched an initiative. So China launched an initiative which is called the so-called One Belt, One Road initiative. This is actually the economic policy of the current Chinese Premier, Mr. Xi Jinping. It is one belt, one road, because actually this is the reinvention of the Silk Road binding China and Europe. However, it is not only a land road, so it is not only binding China and European countries throughout Asia on rails and roads on the mainland. However, it is also an initiative that binds China with European countries through Asia, through other Asian countries, I mean Eastern, Southeast Asian countries, South Asian countries, Central Asian countries, West Asian countries to Europe. So this is the entire Asia-Europe scope, but not only on mainland, so not only by roads and rails, but also on maritime routes, so on the sea. So basically in 2013, the Chinese government, on the initiation of Mr. Xi Jinping, initiated a construct that is titled One Belt, One Road. And actually the One Belt, One Road initiative is nothing else but a huge infrastructural endeavor that connects Europe and all parts of Asia, so from China to Europe, through the entire Asia. However, they understand very well that the basis of economic cooperation is infrastructural cooperation. So we need to build roads, to be maritime roads, railroads, physical roads, to be connected. And if you scroll down on the page, so if you scroll down on this page, then you will see that actually the entire bank, so the bank had actually 57 founding members in 2015. So 57 founding members with a capital of 3.3 trillion US dollars, so 3.3 trillion US dollars. However, if you look at the performance of the bank right now, then you can see that by the end of 2020, so by the end of the last year, the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, had already 103 approved members, and actually these 103 approved members, they were regional and non-regional, so I mean governments, international organizations, and so on and so forth. However, there were 103 members, and they were representing 79%, so almost 80% of the global population, 80% of the population of the entire world, and 65%, almost 2/3 of the global GDP. So I would like to stop here. I tell you why. Because as you can see, the BRICS countries, as a theorem, so as a theory, were coined by Jim O'Neill in 2001. This was only an economic theory, and he said that size matters, and if there are countries with huge populations, with huge consumptions, with huge territories, then they are going to be drivers of the global economy. And obviously the G6 or the G7 or the G8 should be expanded with their membership, because they are going to be key actors in the global economy. Then came 2009. So then came 2009, when Russia basically said that, look, I'm going to initiate a formal alliance. So this was the first Rijeka-Yekaterinburg summit. And Mr. Putin said that, look, we are going, the five of us, so the five of us, we are going to meet each and every year. Immediately 1 year later in 2010, South Africa was invited. And basically for the last 11 years, South Africa has been a member of this community. In 2012, so 2 years later after South Africa joined the community, two years later, they have created a bank with the name of New Development Bank, which obviously has an aim to provide infrastructural investments, so infrastructural investments to these 5 countries. So that is the aim, to create infrastructure and create developmental projects in these countries. Actually, in 2009, 53 projects were approved at a cumulative sum of $15 billion by the NDB. So we might think that with an authorized capital of $100 billion, the New Development Bank is a key player of the global economy. But, again, there is a but. We can see that there is again one more initiative, and this initiative is exclusively Chinese. So this initiative is exclusively Chinese. It is basically meant to support China's role in the global economy. And China understands that its impact on the global economy will depend on the cooperation with other Asian countries, East Asian, Southeast Asian, South Asian, Central Asian, and Western Asian countries, obviously, and obviously North Asia, Russia, and finally Europe. And an initiative was launched, namely the One Belt, One Road. It is also called OBOR, or it is also called Belt and the Road Initiative. So it can be abbreviated as BRI, Belt and the Road Initiative, or OBOR, One Belt, One Road Initiative. It is the same. The point is, China is binding Asia and Europe through land roads, railroads, and maritime routes. It has created a bank, an underlying bank, to support these endeavors. The authorized capital is huge, $3.3 trillion, which is spent on infrastructural investments, which is well above the investments of the new development bank. And by the end of the last year, by the end of 2020, this bank, the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, had already 103 approved members who cover 80% of the global population and almost 2/3, 65% of the global GDP. It is very important to note that the AIIB has received AAA ratings from Standard & Poor's, Moody's, Fitch. So it is an absolutely stable bank, according to the 3 top credit rating agencies. Since 2018, the AIIB was granted a permanent observer status in the United Nations General Assembly and in the ECOSOC. So the UN has 6 major bodies. 1 was suspended, basically, but 5 remained. And one that was suspended is the Trusteeship Council, because the UN Security Council basically carries out the tasks of the Trusteeship Council. However, there are 2 huge sub-organizations within the UN system, the General Assembly and the ECOSOC, so the Economic and Social Council. And then the AIIB has been a permanent observer in both of them since 2018. And this is why I'm going to be very honest with you, because I'm going to be very upfront. The luck or the success or the future of the BRICS countries very much depends on the willingness of China, how much China, as the biggest economy of the world, wishes to cooperate with the 4 other countries, how much China sees the BRICS countries as a counterbalance in its own global expansion projects. And again, I'm going to come back to the multi-party meeting so that I can see you or you can see me. So I'm coming back to the meeting. So actually, at this point, so to this end, it is very difficult to say, because today it is 2021. And as you can see, the AIIB was created in 2015, so 6 years ago. The NDB in 2012. And basically, we don't know. So we don't know yet how the global economy is going to expand. What we know that is very much depends on the political willingness of China, how the BRICS countries are going to evolve. Okay, have you got any questions now? I'm going to stop because we have almost finished. So we have almost finished the country groupings. I'm going to wrap it up. So I'm going to tell you immediately what I'm going to ask about countries in the exam, because from next week on, we are going to go through to our next huge topic, which is about global supply chains, transnational corporations, regional supply chains, because it is quite interesting. The crisis, the current crisis, has hit the global value chains, and value chains are more and more going to operate on a regional level, interestingly. So supply chains have been fragmented due to the crisis. But before we wrap up the issue of countries and nation states and the grouping of countries, I would like to ask you if you've got any questions, please. Have you got questions or suggestions?
I have no question.
No question. Everyone's fine.
Yes, I have no questions either.
Okay. Okay, now I just would like to leave a room, because now we are really wrapping up our first big compound of issues, and then next week we are going to open up a brand new chapter. Okay, so what I would like to underline now, in the exam that is going to be an oral exam, because I don't see any chance to going back to in-person education, unfortunately, this semester. So I think chances are close to zero. So it is going to be an oral exam in an online fashion, unfortunately. So there is not going to be a written exam. Till the end of the activity period, obviously activity papers are cordially welcome via email, but the exam is going to be an oral exam for sure. So nothing's going to change, because everyone's waiting for the vaccine. And please register on the form. Okay, so please reach out to your mentors or the Center of International Programs, because once you have Hungarian Social Security, you can have an access to the vaccinations. So first and foremost, I would like to encourage you to register for vaccination, and that was just a side note to the exam. However, what I would like to tell you that actually there is going to be an oral exam, and I'm going to ask about our first major topic, which is nation states. First and foremost, I would like to ask you about the grouping of nation states in terms of the World Bank's classification, depending on per capita income levels of countries. So the per capita GNI is an approximation of the living standards in countries. And we have learned about 4 categories: the low income, the lower middle income, the higher middle income, and the high income economies. 3 of which, the low income, lower middle income, and upper middle income countries, are defined as developing countries, and the high-income countries are also defined as advanced or developed countries. We have also learned that there is one more grouping that is even below the low-income countries, which is the group of least developed countries. And obviously, there are economic and environmental vulnerability reasons for a country being a least developed country. But we have understood that there is an inclusion and exclusion threshold, so an economic inclusion and exclusion threshold for a country being a least developed country. However, the major point is that these countries suffer human and health problems, health crises, health backgrounds that are the major reasons of these countries not being able to graduate from these status. On the other hand, we also need to understand that these least developed countries can be broken up to 2 further categories. One is the small island developing countries. They are even more disadvantaged than the average least developed countries, because they are located in the middle of the ocean or the middle of the sea, and they are not joining any of the maritime routes that would bind any continent on a purposeful basis, on purpose. The situation is very similar with the other group, the landlocked small developing countries, which suffer the same problem as the small island developing states. The landlocked countries are locked by two other countries and have no access to the sea, and therefore the products that are produced within the country cannot outreach to the international trade routes and cannot reach the global trade process, cannot be a part of the global trade. This is a huge disadvantage. So advanced economies, developing countries, least developed countries, small island development states, and landlocked small developing countries. When we have covered those countries, then we have concentrated on the developing countries, because we have understood that there are approximately 50 developed countries in the world, equally 48, 50 least developed countries, but we have understood that the majority of the countries are developing countries. So with the help of Dr. Katalin Völgyi, we have understood the concept of emerging economies and the Mexican, Asian, Russian financial crisis. So what the terminology of Antoine von Achtmeier's emerging economy has to do with financial crises, what the financial markets have to do with destabilizing an economy. We have understand the concept of newly industrialized countries or newly industrialized economies, which is a special Asian model. So which is a very special Asian model, comes from Akamatsu, comes from Kojima, comes from Saburo Okita, who have compared East Asia to the British Commonwealth as well as the European Union. And they have concluded that Asia cannot go the path of the British Commonwealth, which is an unjust vertical integration. It also cannot go the path of the European Union's horizontal integration, which is just, but it takes a long time and it has a lot of controversies. So this is why they have chosen the model of the so-called flying geese paradigm, which is a multi-sequential model of Asian industrialization. So these are newly industrialized countries choosing industry after agriculture and choosing export concentration, production for exports as a basis of economic growth and investments. We have understood that basically this model has three aspects: a product aspect, basically, a country aspect, basically, and not only a product and a country, but also a production aspect, where a country is first and foremost a producer, an importer, then a producer, and in the end, an exporter of the same product. So this model is international in three different ways, in three different modes. When we have understood the newly industrialized countries, then we have spoken about the G20. So the expansion of the G20, we have connected it to the Bretton Woods system and how the collapse of the Bretton Woods system in 1971 with the Smithsonian Agreement led to that resulted in a global economic crisis in 1973 with the first oil crisis. We have understood how the first oil crisis initiated the foundation of the G6, how the G6 expanded crisis after crisis to G7, G8, and G20. And we have also understood, that parallelly to the G6, G7, G8, and G20, there are 5 countries in the world that are very special, the so-called BRICS countries. one of which, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, one of which China has a decision-making power above everyone else because China is the biggest economy of the world. And it has a decision power on whether the newly development bank or the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank is going to rule the world within 10 years. And we have also understood that the underlying principle in the 21st century is size. So this is why regional integrations are so important. Because yes, there are 5 countries in the world, Brazil, Russia, India, China, that are huge in territory, 2 huge in population, and huge in aggregate GDP. So the administrations, the governments have a scope of decision-making, have a scope for priorities. However, those countries that are not lucky enough to be big enough can be grouped into regional integrations, and regional integrations can act as single markets and basically can compete with the big economies of the world. In fact, I would like to mention once more the ASEAN countries, the 10 countries of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, because the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, if you imagine the map of the world, you obviously understand that they are to the south of China and they are to the east of India. And on one hand, as for global supply chains, so as for inviting in global supply chains, this is going to be our next topic from next class on. These ASEAN countries are competing with China and India for receiving foreign capital, so they are equally host countries for foreign direct investments, just like China and India. On the other hand, they are complementing, so they are not only competitors, but they are also completers, the countries that complete China and India in hosting members of value chains that are located in East, Southeast, and Southeast Asia. So on one hand, this regional integration operates as a single country, as a competition for China and India, and on the other hand, not only a competition for China and India, but also an entity that completes these other 2 countries in terms of hosting global value chains and assembling products for the global market. Okay, so this is what I would like to get back in the exam. So this is what I would like to learn in the exam from you. And this is the very point where we are wrapping up nation states and we are concluding to our next big topic, multinational enterprises, transnational enterprises, or as they are currently titled, global value chains. Okay? Have you got questions, please?
No.
Comments, questions? Was I clear?
Yes.
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 Can you follow the documents that I'm sending?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Please read everything. Everything that I have shown you today will be uploaded to the Moodle system, okay?
Okay.
Okay. So if you've got questions, please feel free to reach out to me personally or any of my colleagues at the Center of International Programs or to Dr. Katalin Völgyész or any one of us. We are very cordially there at your disposal, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so I would like to wish you a very nice week. Have a nice time and please stay safe, okay? Please take care of yourselves. Please stay safe. Please wear your masks, okay?
Okay.
And please stay safe, okay?
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
And please register for vaccination.